Hello and welcome. I believe we are still arriving. Give you a few seconds to settle in. While you're settling in, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Good afternoon and welcome to the Gulf Coast Consortia's panel discussion on the National Institutes of Health K99 R00 award mechanism. I'm Jonathan Meyer from the Rice University Office of Research Development, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. We are very grateful for the participation of our 5 distinguished panelists who are researchers, awardees, mentors, and NIH reviewers among them. They've very graciously donated their time and insight to us today. So we hope our attendees will glean some strategies for their own research proposals and deepen their understanding of the K99 R00 and their future in the biomedical research field. Before I introduce the panelists, we've prompted them to respond to a series of 5 questions. They're going to each speak for about 5 minutes apiece, answering any or all of the following questions. What are the top 3 things you think are most compelling for a competitive proposal? What are some common proposal pitfalls or mistakes to avoid? How can applicants best define their potential to be an independent investigator? What should applicants be doing now to better prepare themselves to be competitive applicants in the future? And what issues, if any, are there in transitioning from the K99 to the R00? How can applicants best handle the balance between these 2 phases? Before I hand it over to the panelists, and we will open it up for a Q&A towards the end of the hour, I want to introduce our panelists to you, and they'll each speak in this session. First, Dr. Cesar Arias is Chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Houston Methodist Hospital and a Professor of Medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College, co-director of the Center for Infectious Diseases, and holds the John and Ann Bookout Distinguished Chair for Research Excellence at Houston Methodist Research Institute. He has been engaged in interdisciplinary training of postdoctoral and clinical fellows for more than 25 years. Dr. Arias has served on a K99 R00 and a DP2, which is the NIH New Innovator Award review panel. And he himself was a previous recipient of a K99 R00 award entitled Enterococcus faecium virulence, a molecular and therapeutic approach. We're very grateful for his presence here today. I'll move through the rest of the panelists real quick. Dr. Monica Pilon is here as well. She's an assistant professor of biochemistry at Baylor College of Medicine, where she joined in 2021 after completing a postdoctoral training at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. Her current R00 project is defining environmental influence on RNA processing. Next, we'll hear from Dr. George Liu, who's an assistant professor of bioengineering and a CPRIT scholar at Rice University. CPRIT is the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. Dr. Liu's research focuses on synthetic biology and protein engineering, and he got his K99 award as a postdoctoral fellow at Caltech through the NIBIB, the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. After Dr. Liu, we'll hear from Dr. Lynn Ziedrich, a professor and the Kyle and Josephine Morrow Chair in Molecular Virology and Microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine. She was a 2020 recipient of the prestigious Barbara and Corbin J. Robinson Jr. Presidential Award for Excellence in Education, which recognizes faculty who have shaped the lives of students through innovative teaching methods and mentoring to better prepare students for leadership, regardless of their career path. Dr. Ziedrich has also served on a K99 review panel, and we'll share about her experience with that. Finally, rounding out our group is Dr. Monty Pettit. Dr. Pettit is a professor and interim chair in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, director of the Seeley Center for Structural Biology and Molecular Biophysics, and the Robert A. Welch Distinguished University Professor of Chemistry at UT Medical Branch at Galveston. He has been active in interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary training programs for 37 years and has served on and chaired several K99 R00 review panels. So we will start with some words from Dr. Cesar Arias. Whenever you're ready, please take it away.
So thank you very much for the invitation. This is, I think, a wonderful opportunity to discuss certain things. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to go direct to the meat. So one of the first things that is being asked, what are the 3 more compelling things when you have a competitive proposal? And I want to say specifically that this is designed for sort of kind of elite candidates in the field. And I think that's very important that people think about where they are in their careers. I was a foreigner medical graduate, so I didn't have the chance to apply to any other K. But if you are a citizen or you are a green card holder in this country, there are other opportunities. And that's very probably a less thorny path with other opportunities. So I think it's very important to know where you are. The second thing that, although this is going to be eventually for people that are really on the verge of independence, your environment and your mentor is going to matter. And I think that's very important that you convey that, even though you probably will move eventually to another institution or environment. And the third important thing that I think for this proposal is that the review panel needs to see that you will be have the potential to be independent in a short period of time. So the R00 is a phase of independence that you really need to achieve. But these 2 years that now have actually only had 1 year of K99, but the 2 years is just to make sure you are completely independent. And that is very important to show in futuristic manner that you can convey that. So some common pitfalls of people is that I think they don't realize why they are in their development process in their careers and probably maybe not quite yet that at that level. And I think that's very clear when that person is there on the reviewer. It's very important that you work with your mentor. And one of the things that I've seen over and over in applications, that you can have a very prestigious mentor, very well known in the field. But if the mentor doesn't see your application, that's not going to work. And that permeates in the application. And so it's very important that you really work with somebody who really wants to help you and have a mentorship sort of view of what needs to be done. And so another common mistake that is very clear is that I see now in this panel called DP2 when you can throw crazy ideas, and it doesn't matter. It's designed for this sort of innovator transformational ideas. I think for the K99 R00, you probably need to be much more your feet on the ground. And one of the common mistakes that I've seen is people become too ambitious in what they want to do, and they may not accomplish either in any of the 2 phases. You're probably going to have only 3 years of your R00 phase. So although you want to be visionary, you want to be also very well focused on what you eventually want to do eventually. And the definition of independence is very clear. And as I mentioned to you, the definition of independent is that you are at that level. That means you are almost able to write an R01. You have enough publication, good quality publications to do that. The number is probably not important, but the quality, and I think the reviewers understand that, and that you are in a specific path that you have shown a track record of success. So I think there are several elements that are very easy eventually to know. Applicants, you want to that level. It's just is preparing for that it's like you prepare for any part of your career. You need to focus on what you like and do your best, and work hard and try to get the best publications that you can, and eventually, and at the end of your K99 portion, you will have to compete for the R00 phase. When you that in that portion, that K99, what you've done in that K99 is going to be very important, but that's a result of what you've done in the past. So 2 years pass really fast. So you're going to find yourself working for an application after 1 year. So you need to show some progress. And what the reviewers really want to do, and this eventually is internal in the NIH, they decide, at least in NIID, that you've made enough progress, or the progress is putting you at that version of independence that you don't need your mentor anymore. And that's the time where people actually tend to move to institution, which is actually a good idea, but it's not absolutely required in that manner. I think my five minutes are up, and I'll be happy to make some comments later. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you for that very thoughtful response. I thought there was a lot of good advice there. We'll move on to Dr. Pilon. Monica, would you take it away?
Sure. Maybe the first thing I'll answer is the top 3 things for a compelling proposal. So I couldn't come up with 3, but I came up with 4. So I'll give you my top 4. So the first one is clarity. Your proposal needs to be clear. If we don't understand the punchline, then it's going to be lost, and that's just going to dampen the impact of your proposal. So how do you become clear? Of course, you can share your proposal with others, get feedback, but I also think you should take power using compelling graphics. So for me, for example, at the beginning of my research statement, I actually had almost like a graphical abstract, how I was tying everything together in a very simplistic image, and then I expanded on that later on. So I would do something of that effect, if possible. The second thing is you need to show that you're going to be independent. That needs to be very clear. So that shouldn't be buried somewhere in your application. That should be very clearly highlighted in multiple places in your application, not only from the documents you provide, but also from the documents that your advisor is going to provide. They also need to reaffirm that that is indeed the case, and that should be very clear. The third thing is why you, right? Why should you be funded? So you need to make it clear that you're an amazing scientist, that you're doing cutting edge research, but also you need to balance that a bit, because this is also a training grant. So you also need to emphasize and show that there is some aspect to you, who you are as a scientist, that you would benefit from a few extra years of training. So it should be really clear what sort of training you need and how that's going to actually work synergistically with who you are today. And what was the last thing? Oh, right. The last thing is relevance to the institute you're submitting your application to. Think about that very carefully. Contact your program officer. That's incredibly important. And really be thoughtful in terms of the feedback you get from your program officer. Are they enthusiastic or not? Really think about that, because I think that's very important. So those are the 4 things for a compelling proposal that I think is worth thinking about. So what are some common mistakes? It's definitely not contacting your program officer. I can't tell you how many of my colleagues didn't do that, and I think they suffered because of it. So don't hesitate to reach out. And then if you can set up a phone call or a Zoom meeting, I think that's your best bet to really get good feedback from that person before you submit your application. And don't do that last minute, because at that point, there's not much you can change, right? So that has to be something you do early on in the process. The second pitfall is not asking for feedback from a wide group of people. So don't just ask for feedback from your advisor. They probably know very well what you're going to be proposing. Also ask someone else who has no idea what you're doing, right? And is in a slightly different area of research. You want to get different perspectives. Okay. And if I have time, but cut me off if I don't, one of the other questions is, how do you emphasize your potential as an independent investigator? And my answer to that would be to put your accomplishments in context. So you can say, well, oh, I have X publications, so clearly I'm successful, but build upon that. So were you publishing consistently, right? If that's the case, then I think you want to emphasize that you published consistently throughout your career, right? So give it context. Maybe there's one publication where you're really proud of it, and maybe it's in a high impact journal, maybe it's in a lower impact journal, but give it context, because maybe that particular publication, you had to overcome some big challenge, right? And you use some creativity to overcome that challenge. So emphasize that, give that context. Mentoring, you can say, oh, I mentored, people throughout my training, so I'll be great when I become an independent investigator. But again, I think you can do more there, because did your mentees get an award, right? When they went to go present their work at some conference, and you were involved in helping them prepare. Emphasize that, right? Give it context. And then the last thing I would say is communication, right? You probably at some point want to say that you're good at communicating in written word, but also verbally. So were there moments where you stood out from the pack, right? That you can emphasize to really show that you are a great communicator. So these are things I think you really want to think about. How do I give context to my accomplishments so they really shine?
Thank you for those very concrete suggestions. We'll move on to hear from Dr. George Liu from Rice University.
All right. Thank you very much for really the invitation to share some of my experience here. So great to see so many people turn out. Right. So basically, I probably will also go through maybe 4 points. And then sort of tie to a few of the questions. Number one, I want to mention is really the timing of when you want to apply. This is kind of attached to the question for what should you do now to better prepare yourself. Because the NIH has 3 periods that you can apply every year, and then there's actually a good chance that your first application may not make it into the awardees. So, and then you have to apply within the first 4 years, right? So if you do the math, then it's good to really apply somewhere in your 3rd year of your postdoctoral training. In ideal case, by that time, you probably have a publication or something that's close to a publication that you can talk about and show in your application that you have that. Therefore, if you factor that in, indeed, you need to start earlier. Okay, now that might be a little bit discouraging to for you if it's a on-the-spot seminar. Maybe I'll see some of the side effects. But then always, although the timing is tight, always remember that if you don't apply, your chance is 0. So even if you're in your 4th year or whatever, always sending an application. You never know. There's always a chance to actually get it. So, but yeah, if for people who are early in postdoc, do think about the timing. That's I think the most important thing in my experience. Second thing I would say is probably more related to question 3. How do you define yourself to be an independent investigator? So in my experience, the best thing will be think about continuous storyline from your PhD to your postdoc and how to get to your future independent career. So how do you tie up different expertise that you gained in those training periods and say something that you are really the only person who have a combination of all this expertise that you can do that type of research. So take an example of my own example that I was trained as a protein structural biologist. And then when I go to postdoc, I actually exactly wrote in the career path that I was motivated to do some protein engineering. So basically take information how nature designed the protein, which is structural biologists look at, to think about how to actually engineer novel proteins for different type of biotechnology applications, right? And then at the end of my postdoc training, that I'm the person who can combine both. Perhaps I can actually investigate the protein that I designed using all the structural tools to really understand their function and mechanism and therefore design better ones. So basically you have a way to kind of tie up your different expertise and then show that you really have a vision of how you are going to be in your own independent faculty position. The third thing I want to mention, I think it's also sort of covering the first 2 speakers, is the mentorship. So your mentors will write a letter, and then it's good that letter actually also echo what you write about your own training plan as well as your kind of like a personal statement, right? So basically you want to really cross-check with your mentor. For example, if you propose a specific conference I'm going to do in the next 2 years, I'm going to, learn more about this area of research to strengthen myself, then your mentor want to echo that, saying that I'm going to, put this person to do that and then actually fully support that. And then also the mentorship, sometimes if you are following a junior PI, sometimes you actually get criticism that, your junior PI hasn't had a track record of training postdocs. So that's where sometimes it's useful to have a mentor committee or advisor committee, whatever you call it, that could very well be your collaborator or people that work closely with your mentor, so that you form maybe a 2 to 4 people team to co-mentor yourself. Yeah, I think the last thing I want to mention is really the last question, transition from, how am I doing in times? So transition from K99 to R00. So the actual research transition, just to be frank and in my own opinion, can varies a lot, because you might be on the job market after 2 years, you might be on the job market earlier. So therefore, how much you accomplish in the K99 phase could vary. However, now let's focus on just writing the grant. Indeed, you want to propose something that's worth 2 years of investigating during your postdoctoral time, right? So something that you are seriously doing as maybe even an independent project that you can do, and then that somehow complements your current thing. And so you could put that into like a specific aim, and then maybe combine that together with some other things, and then shape up your aim 3 or so for your future K9 R00 phase. So yeah, I think I'm exactly on time. So that's the 4 points I want to share, and happy to discuss more.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. I thought that was a good explanation of the narrative continuity and how to apply it to the aims demanded by the proposal. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Len Ziedrich, who's had a lot of experience in this arena. Dr. Ziedrich, please.
Well, you guys have done such a good job of covering things. So I'm saying, okay, what is left? Because I don't need to be redundant. I really do want to reiterate what George said, however, because it is so important. So many people wait until it's perfect, wait until I've published this next paper or till I get this next result. And time goes by quickly. And here's what we've noticed from watching institutions that have more numbers of success is they're just submitting more proposals. So I would encourage you to kind of work early on it and do a really good job, get lots of feedback, give people plenty of time to prepare your letters, give your mentor plenty of time, but don't hesitate to submit and then submit again. Don't give up if you have, a failure the first time. It doesn't matter. Keep putting them in because you can't get that funding. That is such an important thing. Another thing that I think hasn't yet been mentioned is that, people are really hesitant to write how great they are. Monica, you said it so well. You have to show them what I did well. I've been consistent. I've been this. I've stood above the others in this way. And this could be, you win a talk award or you win a poster award. If you've done that consistently through your career, say this thing. It's so hard to say this. And I know that underrepresented people particularly have a hard time, patting them on their own selves on the back. So what you do is you find a colleague who knows you well and that you trust implicitly and have them help you write that section. And then you share those bullet points or the sections with your mentor and or with your people who are writing letters of support. And this is one of the things for number 4. What do you need to be doing now to prepare yourselves? I would say start talking more openly with the people who will write letters of support for you and with your mentor. If they don't know you or your dreams or your strengths, they're thinking about their own things. They may have their own worries. So you need to help them remember what you've done. Again, that's hard. It's particularly hard for some of us, but you have to do it. If you're not your own best advocate, no one's going to be an advocate for you. They care about you, but they may not know the information that might be most important for the panel to see. And one of the top 3 things I haven't heard yet for a compelling competitive proposal, when I read something where I can feel the excitement, where I feel that the person writing this is like just super eager to do it, that can overcome like fewer publications or maybe, maybe not as high impact publications or maybe even a young mentor. Because if there's this excitement and some nice preliminary data that supports the excitement, that's something that really makes your proposal rise. Because if you're enthusiastic, I can get enthusiastic. I've seen too many proposals where people are so caught up in writing the perfect science and sounding like a scientist, they forget that it's about telling a story and about being interesting, right? And excited about it. So don't hesitate to let your enthusiasm and your excitement for the project come through. And if you're not feeling that enthusiastic and about it, I can almost guarantee your reviewers will not either. So be sure that you have, when you ask people to review it, say, you know, is this sounding exciting? Am I really capturing the most important aspect of this work? And another thing that I find compelling is when people have consulted, especially if you're working on a particular disease or a common problem in the medical community. If you consult with or bring in the expertise of a clinician, I find that really valuable because, you know, there will be clinicians on the panel. There will be people who are world's experts, but there'll be people who are not at all world's experts, right? So you need to educate those who are not experts, but it shows to the person who knows that you're working on something that's really important. And if you're a few steps back, that's okay. You can do very basic work, but you need to have a vision for where your work will impact somehow the world for greater good, society for greater good, or maybe for medical something. It's a throwaway line if you say, oh, if I find this, we can maybe make a drug against it. Panels hate that. So on the thing, but common pitfalls, if it's just this throwaway line, that never does well. So you really need to put more thought into connecting what you're proposing to do to something that's going to make a difference to people, that will make them excited about funding you. Let's see. Oh, just something that I've seen sink too many otherwise great proposals. Never forget to write the rigor and reproducibility section. If you are not having that section, you're going to be not even discussed right off the bat. So be sure, and don't just throw that together. You have to give some thought and be sure that you know when the stuff you propose will give you the answer that you've to the hypothesis or the goal that you've stated. A thing that is another thing that sinks proposals is having too many hypotheses.
5 minutes.
All righty, too many hypotheses, or the hypotheses that are not tested clearly by the proposed experiments. So that's another thing that can be a real burden to the success of a proposal if you have just too many ideas. So I think Monica and George have touched on that. Have a clear, compelling idea that you can uniquely address. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ziedrich. That was really, really good advice. We have one more panelist to respond to the question prompts. Dr. Monty Pettit, would you care to take it away?
Sure. So thanks. Happy to be part of this. Previous folks have done a great job of going through the actual stuff. And so I'm just going to go back and use a little bit of intellectual spackling and fill in a few cracks here and there, because the main topics have been covered. I would like to emphasize that this has the most treacherous and difficult aspects of writing both a research proposal and a training grant. And a training grant is a whole different beast than a research proposal. One thing that's very important is you must be proposing to do something different than what your advisor is doing. If you're just parroting what your advisor is doing, that's not enough. You're supposed to be getting training, and you're supposed to really learn something different. And so this wonderful idea of having a whole panel of advisors, excellent. That frequently would rate very highly, especially if they wrote the best letters, because it can't be something that's already in your advisor's lab. Because by definition, you've been there for a little while, you should have picked it up. So that's not good enough. You really have to, as has been said, you have to distinguish yourself, but more bluntly, you need to do something different, okay, than your advisor is doing. You need to really put that other folks haven't put together. The other thing that's sort of on the training grant side is the letters. And these have been mentioned several times in the previous speakers' talks, but emphasizing independence. I can't tell you how many times we trashed a grant because, you know, the letter from the advisor, it was good, but, you know, they didn't actually come out and say, and they can take this project with them, period. Flat out, they can take it with them. They don't do that. At least in NIGMS, you're probably going to get hammered, if not triaged. They really want to see a very clear statement that you can take the project with you, and that you can then use it in your own independent career. Other letters, frequently there's a letter from the department chair. As has been said earlier, meet these people, make sure they know who you are. But if you're going to get a department chair, again, that's a relationship you want to cultivate for a little while in advance. But you've got to have these letters, and quite honestly, these letters are picked apart at a level that is probably more detailed and more honorary than when you're trying to get a job. So these letters are really going to be scrutinized for every little thing that's in there. As a pitfall, and it's kind of been said, but again, this is not just an R01. This is an R01. They really want to see the training value. There are aspects of the actual research they might even give you a break on, you know, in terms of things, preliminary results, other things that would be expected for an R01 and stuff like that. But they really want to see that the training value, that you're really going to learn something new and do something with it, is really, really important for this sort of thing. They, the panelists are, in fact, told this is not an R01. And I have many times had to correct panelists and tell them, yeah, let's not spend so much time on the science. What about the training? Are these people going to get something new out of this and the like? Because as panelists, we just love to talk about the science. That's what we're there about. We're learning, you know, we're trying to figure out what's cool and what's not and everything. And they can dribble on, quite honestly. And so we have to correct the reviewers and get them to focus on the fact that this is a K99 R00, or kangaroo as they're affectionately called, and it's not an R01, because most of the people reviewing this have all had experience doing R01s, R21s, R35s, and things like that. So I think I'm about out of, but that's the spackling I think I can add, because these guys did such a great job. So.
Dr. Pettit, thank you for those comments. I love your emphasis on the career development plan being just as, if not more important than the initial proposed R00 plan, and the value of the letters of support as well. Thank you for that insight. Well, we have some time now to do a Q&A with the attendees. While we think of questions we'd like to ask our panelists, I want to just invite, you know, any of our 5 panelists, any comments about something the other panelists might have said that you would like to emphasize or combat a little bit, or just reiterate. If there's anything that you'd like to say, that would be now would be the time to do it. And then I invite questions from the attendees. You can drop them in the chat, I believe is the protocol. And we will cherry pick some and see if we can get some more responses from those specific questions.
John, I just wanted to emphasize something that Monte just said, that the project itself has to be, that is not an R01 project. I think that has to be clear. The project has to be a vehicle for you to get to the other side. So the project doesn't have to be perfect. So the individual is the career development, and you as the investigator has to shine all the way through. Probably much more than the project itself. The project has to be good, and the reviewers have to be all scientists. They have to believe that can be done. But you know, people try to get a perfect project, and that's something that Montes said that I think is very important. The project has to be the vehicle for you to get trained, and that actually applies to all the case here at a different level, but that's very important.
Building off of that, there were two questions that came in through the chat almost at once, both asking how important preliminary data is in the application. Would anybody like to respond to that?
I'll take it. I think Cesar just said it perfectly. You have to show that it's feasible, and that you either have some expertise or that you're planning to train to get the expertise, and that you'll have it. But it's not an R01 level of preliminary results. You do have to show it's feasible. You said it perfectly, Cesar.
Thank you.
Yeah,
For researchers, sorry, go ahead.
The preliminary data, you have to entice the reviewer with the preliminary data that this is something cool and it's going to be feasible. That's the objective of the preliminary data. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, you have to entice the reviewer to do that.
It should suggest something promising. It should suggest a strong potential for continued work, right? For researchers in clinical residencies, does the K portion of the award need to include substantial research effort, or can the K portion also include non-research career development? I know for a fact that the K portion can include career development, certain kinds of training that you might engage in, but I'll let the experts provide a more nuanced answer.
So as a clinician, I can respond to that, and you know, all my mentees are mostly clinicians. As a clinician, you will be given minimum of 75% protected time, and you will have to accommodate everything in that 75% time because the 25% clinical is usually non-negotiable.
Very specific response. Thank you. There's an interesting question here. Can we propose some kind of hypothesis from a new area in which the applicant does not have much training currently, but is learning that area now? I suppose that kind of dovetails a little bit with how the career development and research plan might intersect. Would anybody like to respond to that one?
I say, of course. I mean, of course you can, but you have to defend why you will be learning how to be able to address it, because feasibility is really, really important. But you have to just deal with that. The best would be, as Monty said, that your mentor would address this in their letter as well, right? They were going to say, hey, this is feasible and this is out of my area of expertise. And you can even be within the area of the lab, as long as that mentor helps you to say, hey, that's their project, I'm not going to be competing with them, right? Or addressing that in some kind of direct way. So I think that question might have come from the idea that, gosh, I can't do what my boss is doing. But you're welcome to go into new areas. In fact, I think that's a great way to make that bridge that Cesar was talking about, right? That, hey, this is new. This is why I still need a little more training. But boy, I'm going to address this really cool question.
I just want to piggyback. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that's similar to actually what I did to show that I was going to be independent. So I was studying proteins that were processing RNA in the nucleolus for my postdoc. And then to show I was going to be independent, I decided I was going to switch over and look at RNA binding proteins in the mitochondria, right? So I had no expertise in mitochondrial biology, but that was how I was going to show I was going to be independent. One of my co-mentors was an expert in mitochondrial biology. He was actually one of the writers for my co-mentoring letter. But I think what's key here is showing feasibility. right? That this is going to be feasible. So for example, I was specific in every way it could be to show it's feasible. So this person had a lab down the hall from our lab. So they weren't in our department, but they were literally just a walk down the hall. So I explained I was going to be doing those experiments in his lab. His lab is just down the hall, right? So anytime you can be specific to emphasize feasibility, I think is always a plus. And if that person can actually be a part of the mentoring letter, I think that adds additional support.
Yeah, I just want to say that if you, I mean, I couldn't go more with Lynn and Monica. I mean, these are really great advice. But if you think you are going to go in a direction and you've been very successful in something, but you're going to be the totally opposite direction or very adventurous direction, but you have a really cool idea, check that DP2, at least with AID, that DP2 New Innovator Award. I think, you know, I've read in the last 4 years so high cool projects that were probably not preliminary data and people who want to just transform the world really. And so, you know, if you think you are going that direction, check it out, because if you are thinking about a K99, that might also fit your thinking.
Thank you for that suggestion, Cesar, and thank you for your insight, Monica. The DP2 is a really interesting NIH award mechanism. It's the New Innovator Award for early stage investigators, and it's the high risk, high reward category. So something a little more off the wall, so to speak. And the proposal requirements are a little distinct as well. So you end up writing an essay sort of about yourself and about the potential for your project rather than a detailed career development plan and or research plan. So slightly different mechanism. It's not open as often, I'll note, as the K99 ROO, but definitely worth looking at it if you're at the right stage. Thank you. Other questions, questions from our attendees or comments from our panelists?
I guess while we are waiting for the question, I can just further echo what Monica and Cesar said for the previous question. So in my case, it's also similar that I indeed propose an entirely new method development in my aim 2 that I literally did maybe just pull out some figures from different literature. That's the amount of preliminary data I have for that. And this is totally okay in this case because at that time in my current lab, there are enough expertise in protein engineering to say that we can do this. We have enough understanding of the system to really address the feasibility case. But indeed, I see in other cases, I guess, for example, what Monica said in her case, where if you are jumping a little bit far from what your current lab has, try to find a collaborator or try to find someone who is an expert in the field, right? Because indeed, when you carry out a new project, you want to start a conversation with people who know what's the current frontier in that field, rather than just you yourself read a few papers and do that. And the reviewer will also see that when they read through your paper, read through your application. So, but overall, yeah, it's totally encouraging to do a new direction.
For some of our panelists who have served on review panels, that environment criterion, is that where, you know, the sense of collaborations or the proximity even to a lab space where work is going on, is that kind of couched in how you review the quality of the environment for an application? Yes, okay.
Yeah,
So
sure.
emphasizing those connections, collaborations, access, relationships, that's all part of the environment, correct?
And you have to provide that information because people sometimes just cut and paste things off of their institution's pages onto that environment descriptor. It's not useful, right? So you have to link it to what you propose to do. And especially if it's linked with your mentors. This gets back to get started early, get started now. You know, it takes a while to craft a proposal, get feedback, make sure all the sections tie in with all the other sections. I wonder, you know, it would be really helpful if we could, well, the AID has examples of funded grants on their websites. But I was thinking maybe we could start our own little repository if people were willing to share their successful proposals. It's very helpful to look at what has been successful. You don't have to copy that. There are so many ways to win. You know, if you don't apply, you're not going to win. But, you know, you can have just the new idea. You can have a fabulous team. You could be in the right place at the right time, and you can have this unique training in your background. You have many ways to win. So I think all of you probably think, oh, I have to check every box perfectly. No one does, right? You have to keep in mind, no one checks every box perfectly, and everyone feels insecure about it. So make sure, back to the environment question, make sure that that makes sense for what you're proposing to do and where you plan to go. I mean, I don't know if Monica and George, if you mentioned the kind of institutions you would be moving to, or how that worked. I don't know what you guys, because again, there's so many ways to do that correctly. But maybe did you mention, probably not, the typical environment that you would hope at your next institution? Did you mention that?
I didn't until I had my R00. Then I emphasized how Baylor College of Medicine was like the perfect place to do what I proposed. So that was the moment I brought it up. George, I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I didn't mention that in the K99 application. So, and then to echo what you were saying, really, even if you failed this K99 application, it's still a great learning process. That's one thing that really I was encouraging myself through both writing this grant and other grants, right? Through writing it, you actually both learn the process as well as shaped up your idea a lot better. And those ideas, you know, when you become independent PI, you can throw it for R01, probably you get even more money out of it. And you know, once you become independent investigator, actually there are a lot of grant application opportunity that you can shoot for. So yeah, so go try it. Don't you know, let yourself be afraid of this process.
I just want to note that every panelist has at one point or another today emphasized just going for it, and has also emphasized the stepping stone aspect, which I think the K99 R00 really serves in that trajectory, career trajectory sense. So just to put a little underline on there. So we have a few more questions and a few more minutes remaining. So I'm hoping we can get through these. Amit asks, which type of research proposal is best? I suppose a basic, translational, or a mixed one. Does the interdisciplinarity account for anything, or what is your reaction to that question, folks?
I mean, I've reviewed phenomenal basic science projects with no application whatsoever that were incredible, right? And at the same time, I've also reviewed translational projects that were really applicable, but they were fantastic too. So I think you just have to do the best project that you can. You know, if there is some applicability, I'm not sure. I mean, again, it's just the quality of the science. You know, people will be evaluating that. So I don't worry too much about that.
You know, can I just comment that I'm seeing a little bit of people try to give the reviewers what they think the reviewers want. And really, I would encourage you to just give the reviewers your best version of yourself and your ideas. Well reviewed, well, you know, put together. Don't be so caught up in what's going to do best. Oh, should I do this? Do what you really hope to do. Just be honest and truthful and do it. You just make it as good as you can. So don't get worried about, do I need, oh, is this to this or to that? Because I agree with Cesar. I've seen every kind of grant, ranging from very basic to very clinical, funded. That's just not, I don't think that's been an issue.
In your own experiences, how often have grants been funded based on personal relationships between reviewers and the applicant, or the PI where the applicant comes from? I think there's, yeah, you may have talked a little bit about this earlier. There are some accountability structures, conflict of interest structures in place. Would you care to say a little bit about that?
Sure. The conflict of interest rules are really quite stringent and very, very clear. And so if there are any personal relationships between the reviewer and any of the PIs, any of the letter writers, or anything else. They absolutely have to leave the room at that time. They may not even be present during the reading of it or the scoring of it, and can have nothing there. Where the application comes from speaks to the institutional environment. So of course it's legitimate to say, do they have the facilities? Do they have the intellectual gravitas for this sort of thing at that particular institution? That's okay, but there can be absolutely no personal relationships.
Thank you. For the description of GCC benefiting a proposal, Antonio, you might reach out to the GCC staff in regards to how that might apply. Obviously, working groups, consortia, I think mentioning something about, as that being part of your career development wouldn't be out of line. But we'll move on to the next question. Is it difficult to demonstrate independence in the application, even if you're hoping to stay at your institution long term? I'm wondering if it would be easier to demonstrate independence in that case. What are your thoughts, panel?
So I, for example, stayed in my own institution in the K99, but I understand the struggle with people when they have a mentor that are doing similar things that you are doing. And some of the reviewers, I've heard this conflict in the discussions so how much your new proposal is independent. And that's why you are going to stay in your institution. You have to be absolutely sure, as Monica actually mentioned, that your proposal is a new direction and it's different from your mentor. And you have your mentor said that even the person that stays here, this person is going to take everything they have in my lab and they're going to take it for their own careers. Those two elements are crucial if you are staying in the same institution.
And I'll just reiterate, so we have Dr. Joe Heiser. He just got promoted to tenure at Baylor College of Medicine, and he's been at Baylor his entire career, and it has not hurt him at all, especially if you're in a large institution. And I think all of our institutions in the medical center are considered pretty large. It's an easy way to find your new niche, even if it looks like from the outside. So I'm seeing less of that as criticism, but I'm with Cesar. I do hear sometimes some little noise. Usually I'm the one that speaks up and points out where the applicant has clearly differentiated themselves and kind of defended, because sometimes people need to stay in the same city. And again, this gets back to the underrepresented in the group. Sometimes they are not willing to leave their home city. So we've kind of evolved to not penalize people anymore for needing to stay in their same city or in their same institution. And that's become a kind of a refreshing new view at the NIH. But if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm glad to hook you up with Joe, and he can say how he set aside himself, to make it his own career, different from Mary Estes, his mentor, his career.
Very kind of you. Sorry, go ahead, George.
I think to that point, indeed, it might depend on the size of the institute. So I came from Caltech as well as right now here at Rice. I think both these two universities are small private universities. So indeed, you rarely see a case where someone go from postdoc to becoming a faculty in this institute. So, if that's very likely that's also the perception from outside. So therefore, in your proposal, if you actually propose you want to continue to stay at Caltech, it might be actually very bizarre in those cases. So it really depends case by case. And in larger institutes, especially medical centers, and I think it's much more common.
That's an important distinction. We probably have time for maybe this one more, which is an interesting one. How important is having a good publication record, specifically with journal papers? And the person who asked the question also mentioned having some experience in industry before returning to academia as a postdoc. Have you ever encountered that? And how does that align with the publication record question?
maybe I'll just take the first step into it. I think your industrial experience doesn't count into that 4 years of postdoc training. So you're pretty well off on that case. Just make sure you really clarify that in your writing, that you have this additional period, so that people don't penalize saying that you don't have enough publication over the year. Yeah, that's just my advice.
And I might add that if you've been successful in some way in your other career, you can go ahead and mention that, or how that brought you back to want to be back in academia. But I've never seen anyone hold against. There are many reasons people leave and come back, and there are even mechanisms specifically to allow that to happen at the NIH now. I've never seen any reviewer hold that against you. So you need to just highlight your record from your PhD and your successes during your other, wherever you were. And, you know, if you've been kind of consistent, like Monica said in the very beginning, consistently excellent or consistently getting your job done, that's what reviewers really care about, I think.
Good, thank you all. In the little time we have left, I just want to really emphasize my genuine gratitude to each of the 5 panelists who graced us with their presence today and their insight. It was a really valuable, good conversation, a real peek behind the curtain in some cases. So thank you all for that.